Hi YouTube, Laura here at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by. I'm just on to do a VR to a tag that was started by the collaborative channel 3 Fat Readers, which I've just kind of discovered and watched this video, a tag that they've made called HowITarot. So I'll link to their initial video below, and I've been watching other folks respond to this tag and enjoying getting to hear other folks' answers, so I thought that I would get on and provide mine, and I'm looking forward to continuing to look at those. So in their video, Danny, Dustin, and Lisa, who are the hosts of the collaborative channel, each contributed some questions and they discussed their answers, and I just watched their video yesterday. It was their second video on this collaborative channel. The first was on Game of Thrones. I have no interest in Game of Thrones, so I didn't watch the first one. But I'm really excited about their channel, and I'm looking forward to future episodes as well, or installments, I guess. So these HowITarot questions are really just about what your tarot history and practice looks like. And so some of them I've kind of touched on in other videos already. So those ones I might give just shorter answers, but I'll just jump right in, I guess. So the first three, I've got the questions. I'm going to keep looking in this direction. It's because I've got the questions in a Word document open. So the first 4 questions were provided by Danny, the next 4 by Dustin, the last 4 by Lisa, and then the bonus question that kind of arose in conversation that wasn't intended to be part of it, but has been included there at the end. So the first question is, what sparked your interest in tarot, beginnings/origin stories? So I talked about this in my 2 video responses to the tarot tag related to my first tarot deck. The first time I responded, I didn't have my first deck, and then after I responded to that tag again because I had found the deck in a closet in my parents' house. So I got that first deck in 2001. I would have been 14-ish. And I talked about in that other video, I was just kind of really drawn at that time in my life to Charmed and the craft and any kind of witchy things, I guess, if we want to talk about it that way. So tarot was kind of one of a number of things that I was interested in. So I got the deck in that context. I also knew growing up that some members of my family, my grandmother's family, siblings, read playing cards. And these were folks that I never really met or only met very briefly. That family is not in Canada, which is where I am. But reading cards was kind of a thing that, like, I didn't grow up around it per se, but certainly it was kind of acknowledged as something that family members did. And so it wasn't kind of looked down on, I would say. So I got my first deck then, and I kept it in a little black velvet purse, which I showed in my previous video, and that's what sparked my interest. Question 2. Do you only use tarot in your readings, or do you add in other forms of divination? Okay, I'm going to reframe the question a little bit, because the question asks if I add in other forms of divination, and I don't really mix things together all that much. So I do work with oracle cards, less than tarot, but usually for kind of daily draws, I'll pick an oracle card. I also have the Elemental Divination, a dice oracle book, and I really like that. I recently got the Journey Tokens by Kelly Fitzgerald, A Truth and Story. I've been enjoying slowly getting to know that system, but mostly oracle cards for sure. But I don't really kind of add them, right? I don't usually do readings that involve multiple decks, for example, unless you count kind of pulling one tarot and one oracle in the morning for myself. I don't really mix them together so much. Generally, they're separate, actually, but I do use others. Question 3, are you a psychic or a card reader? And I will say in the list of questions that they've got like psychic kind of in scare quotes, and I feel ways about that. I don't identify as a psychic. I don't consider myself psychic. So I guess I would consider myself a card reader. It's being presented as an either or question. I think that, maybe you can be both, or maybe, now I feel on the spot. Maybe I should have thought about these questions beforehand. Maybe there are like other ways to describe having a tarot practice as well that would be maybe neither psychic nor card reading, right? Maybe spiritual seeker, or, enthusiastic, reflective journaler, or like all kinds of ways to kind of describe that are maybe neither. I'm not sure. Maybe that's a future video or thought to develop. But I guess for the purpose of the question, I'm a card reader because I do not identify as a psychic. I've never found myself to have I've never found myself to have kind of psychic abilities. I don't really know what it feels like to have those kind of abilities. So I would not describe myself in that way. Number 4. Do you use tarot for anything other than readings? And then in brackets, they have spells, altar cards, display as art, gifts, etc. It came up in the live chat. I definitely use cards as bookmarks if they're kind of the extra cards, the art cards. Or occasionally, you order a deck. When I ordered my Trionfi della Luna from Patrick Valenza, he sends, a bunch of extra sample cards from other decks. So I have these kind of one-off cards that don't really go with anything. I use those as bookmarks all the time. I do use tarot cards as well for pathworking meditations, for sure. And I also keep some cards out, so I will do a year ahead spread with one card per month, and then each month I'll have that card kind of out displayed. So in displaying it, I guess I'm doing something with it other than a reading. I've given tarot decks as gifts a few times. It's not something that I would kind of do unsolicited. Like I've kind of gifted a deck to someone here and there who's shown interest in having one. Spell work is not a part of my practice or a part of my life. Not at this time anyway. So mostly meditations, I guess. Number 5. Have you ever taken a break from tarot? If yes, why? So yeah, definitely. I got that first deck quite young, 14, and I think ultimately I was too young, which is not a prescriptive thing. I'm not saying like people who are 14 shouldn't have tarot decks, but I think that for me, I was kind of finding things that I was interested in and kind of getting things that seemed compelling to me, and I wasn't in a place that I was wanting to kind of intensively study them or anything like this. And I can remember, shuffling them and asking a question and pulling out one and reading the booklet and so on. But eventually I think I just kind of lost interest. And so they got put in the closet, and they sat there. And then I returned much, much later as a adult. I guess not that much later, like late teens maybe. But yeah, I think I just wasn't quite ready at the time. So I took a break. Since then, coming back, I would say I have not really taken a break, no. If you could live in any tarot card from the Rider-Waite-Smith, which would it be? This was actually the only question I thought about ahead of time. So I read the questions and kind of thought about this question even before I had watched the Three Fat Readers chat where they answered the questions. And for some reason, when I read this question, even though the question totally does not say this, I restricted my thinking to Major Arcana. I read it as Major Arcana card that you would want to live in. And without having heard Dustin's answer, who gave the same answer I'm going to give, I came up right away with the Star card. And the Star card appeals to me as a place to live for a number of reasons. It's a beautiful kind of outdoor scene beside water, which is, a favorite place to be. And like Dustin talks about in the live chat, the figure in the card is nude and so kind of at ease and comfortable. in that, under the sky and in nature. And I love that. I love that as a kind of place to be emotionally, I guess, or in terms of comfort in one's own body and feeling at ease and feeling fully oneself in these kind of ways. I like the message of the star card as one of kind of hope and feeling like you have the guidance you need and all the things I think about with the star card. And I also just love, like, being naked in the woods is one of the best parts of backwoods camping for me, or like camping outside of, highly populated campgrounds. So the star card is the one that I would live in. Question number 7. Do you use the tarot in a predictive way? Do you predict the future? I feel like this question gets asked a lot. And sometimes, I don't know, not the best. And I always answer this question differently. I'm not sure. So before I give my answer to this question, I will just remind folks, or tell folks if you're here for the first time, that I very, very, very predominantly read for myself. I sometimes read for friends who are interested, but mostly for me, because I think that does change things a little bit. And for me, I, to at least some extent, do use tarot in a predictive way. And I think that there was a time when I would have said no, like really aggressively, like, no, I don't, I don't do that. The future is not fixed. I have free will. You can't do that, And I think I would have said that. And I still absolutely believe that the future is unwritten and we have agency to change a lot of things in our lives. Definitely not all. That's true. But I don't think, and I said this in a previous video, I don't think that precludes reading predictively or making predictions. And I think that we make predictions all the time. And I used the example previously, like I can predict that I'll do better on a test if I study than if I don't, right? So maybe I predict likelihoods for myself. Maybe I read predictively in the sense of looking at where my current path that I'm walking might be leading, because that can then help me to think about whether I want to reorient, right? Whether I want to do things differently. I don't ask predictive questions in the sense of kind of very fixed, in what month will this happen kind of questions. Which is not to say I don't think other people should. I happen to not. But I'll say like I predict likelihoods, for sure. And I will do similarly when I read for friends, with, some caveats. And when I read for friends, it's a kind of very conversational process, and includes kind of conversation around, well, this is kind of what's showing up, right? These are the energies that are showing up. These are the kind of themes that are showing up. In no way am I telling you, in 2 weeks, this is absolutely going to happen, full stop, personally. So that's how I approach predictive reading. And it is something that I've kind of shifted my thinking about over time. And I'm sure that thinking will continue to shift as I grow. Okay. Number 8. Okay, this is kind of what your reading style is, and the options that are listed are kind of intuitive, rote, classic, modern, mix. And I guess I have to say mix. I'm not necessarily clear on what modern style would mean. I feel like inevitably everything that I've learned about tarot and about reading and about the cards comes in some way every time that I'm reading. So just as a kind of example, right? I recently did Tom Benjamin's Tarot on Earth book, or not so recently, like last summer, right around when it came out. I worked on that Tarot on Earth course book because I was interested in learning more how to work with Pip style or Marseille style decks when I had previously only really been working with more Rider-Waite-Smith inspired decks. And so when I did that course, which I'll link everyone probably knows Tom Benjamin's channel, but I'll link below. And when I worked through that book, I learned a lot about numerology, and I really kind of distilled my thinking about the significance of the suits and things like this. And that kind of thinking around, for example, the thinking about number and different numbers showing up, absolutely now comes into mind when I'm reading with a Rider-Waite-Smith style deck too. Not just Pip or Marseille style decks, even though that's kind of what the book is focused on, right? So it all kind of comes together for me. Certainly there's a lot of intuition involved, for sure. I feel like you can't just ask a question, pull a card, and read the keywords or something like that, because the keywords may well have nothing to do with the question that I've asked. So there's always that kind of putting the puzzle pieces together to figure out how everything I know about these particular cards in the combination that they've appeared and in the order that they've appeared speaks to the question that I've asked. And so that's definitely a kind of mix of styles. In terms of maybe, if I think now, I've been thinking and talking at the same time about what kind of modern reading style might mean or might look like for me, and the ways that might be something I do, is that I have read a lot of books that talk about kind of classic or traditional reading methods that attribute to the different court cards genders, even like physical appearances. I don't read like that. I don't gender the cards. I don't gender the cards, period. I definitely don't gender the court cards in this, the queen is a woman in your life kind of way necessarily. I think that, all of the cards can speak to all of us in different ways. So maybe that's a modern thing. I don't know. But I think it's important to mention, I guess. Okay. Question number 9. What are your most consistent tarot habits? Asks Lisa. My most consistent tarot habits: drawing cards in the morning, usually 1 tarot and 1 oracle, but I call it the daily-ish draw because it's not necessarily every single day, and I'm not into passions starting to feel like work. So I don't kind of hold myself to really, really rigid, strict daily practices in that way. I do read for myself on full moon and new moon times, and we'll be doing that today for the eclipse time as well. And my kind of habit for those readings is to, usually I'll read my horoscope and read a little bit about that particular full or new moon in that sign, and then I'll develop my own spread that feels relevant to me and to the energies of that astrological time. And I really like doing that, and it's helping me to learn astrology better as well, which I'm very much a beginner at. Yeah, those are, I guess, the most consistent habits, I would say. And also journaling, tarot journaling for sure. I write something down for every reading that I do for myself. And I usually will write down as well if I do a reading for a friend, make kind of a layout of the cards on a piece of paper and write down all the ones that came up in which positions. So always writing things down. Question 10. Do you see tarot as a magical tool, a spiritual tool, a psychological / self-help tool, something else, all of the above? Okay. With the caveat that I very deliberately choose for myself to not spell magic with a K. Maybe that's another video, but I don't, which is not to say other people shouldn't, but I don't. So if I can delete the K out of the question and call it magical with just the C, then I'll say all of the above. For me, very much a spiritual tool, very much a meditative tool, self-reflection tool, to facilitate inquiry about myself and my unconscious and my condition and the environment around me. And I just found a new channel on YouTube that I'm really excited to have just subscribed to. I think Corvin Greene, I'll link below, who has started a series, and one of the first, I think it is the first actually in the series, talks about tarot as a mirror, and that really resonates with me too. Question number 11. Do you collect tarot decks? And again, collect is in these kind of little, I just copy and pasted the questions from the YouTube video. So do you collect tarot decks? Why or why not? Okay. I have more than one, for sure. I have nowhere near the size of the collections I have seen on YouTube. Not by a long shot. I think, I haven't counted my decks recently, but I think that even if kind of every Kickstarter backed deck that I've backed that isn't here yet and won't be here yet for quite a while, even if all those were to come, then I would be kind of maybe around 50 decks, but I think I might still even be below. But in that kind of realm, plus a much smaller Oracle deck collection. So I do have multiple decks. And so that, I guess, means that I collect decks. On the other hand, I will say, depending on how kind of collect is interpreted, I don't, and again, none of these things are prescriptive. None of this is me saying other people shouldn't do something differently than me. But I don't buy decks just, to have them. I don't, for example, buy rare decks or limited edition decks and keep them in the packaging, knowing that they'll be worth more later, for example, which, I think about like people collecting like baseball cards and things like this, trying to have one of each of something or keeping them in this kind of pristine condition. I don't do that with my cards, not even close. Every deck I have has been shuffled and shuffled and shuffled. I use the decks that I purchase, and I don't purchase a deck that I don't know that I will want to work with. So there's that. And in terms of the kind of why or why not question, I mean, obviously part of it is inevitably going to be, financial. I can't buy every deck on the market. I feel completely fine about that, for sure. And tarot is, as I've mentioned, not something I do for a living. So when I'm buying a deck, it's very much for me. It's not a kind of thing that I can think about as this is an investment, for a business or something like that, because it's just not, I don't make money from reading tarot. So very much just for me. I have occasionally, when I've had a few decks come at once, gotten that sense of kind of overwhelm, and been quite overwhelmed by it. And I didn't like that feeling. So I'm mindful in that way. But I do like having multiple decks, and I like having multiple decks because I think I've found, after having kind of one deck for a very long time, that different decks and even different systems, I like to ask different kinds of questions. My mood and the season especially can kind of shift what kind of deck or kind of imagery I want to be working with. So I like to have multiple decks for that reason. I've also found whenever I've read for my partner or friends, I always give them a few decks to pick from, right? I'll bring out 3 or 4 or 5 decks, and they can pick which one that they're most drawn to and would like for me to use. And every single time, the one that is picked has been different, right? So my partner goes for Deviant Moon, like really predictably, like every time. But other friends have picked the Morgan Greer or picked Prism Visions, and never picked the same thing. So I think having multiple decks, insofar as I'm going to read for anyone else, is nice in that way. But I like having a smallish, or what feels to me like a manageable size of a tarot collection. I've never bought a deck and then given it away, or bought a deck and then found, this deck doesn't actually work for me. I don't really like it. I thought I would, but I really can't find a use for this. And I feel like if I bought a lot of decks, that might start to happen. I don't necessarily get along with, every deck that is published. So I really am just only getting ones that I really feel interested in. Number 12. Do you have an aesthetic when it comes to the types of decks you enjoy? And if so, what is it? Okay. There's a part of me that wants to say no, because I have some very, very different aesthetics in my collection. And different decks that I love look very different from each other. So I love the Deviant Moon so much. But I also love Considerate Cat, which is a very different feeling. I also love La Court de Taroki, which is very kind of classical looking pip deck. But I also like decks that are more contemporary, like Next World Tarot has blown my mind and changed my life. And these decks are all really different. Different art mediums, different systems, different styles, different court and major arcana renames, different suit names, like all different kind of aesthetics, really. It's easier for me to say, if that's okay, not to be negative or whatever, what kind of aesthetics don't work for me, because I've learned that. And again, this is not to put down anybody else's tastes or anything like that. It's good that there are many different decks for many different folks. I have found that photo manipulated decks are not for me as a general rule. I find it difficult to work with decks that have really photorealistic faces in particular. And I'm not sure why that is, if it's that I find the facial expressions affect my interpretation too much, maybe. But generally, and I appreciate the skill involved in this kind of photo manipulation or photo collage decks, but generally it's just not an aesthetic that I'm drawn to. I don't like, what else do I not like? There's a lot of things I don't like. Maybe I'll just leave it there. Photorealistic decks, not so much. And maybe like kind of more cartoony or comic booky style illustrated decks don't always call out to me, but again, there's always exceptions to these, right? I love the Tarot of the Magical Forest, and I just ordered the Numinous Tarot, which, Noel, the artist, is also making a comic book. So I can't even say that a particular art style that is maybe not one that draws me isn't going to draw me sometimes. So very, very open-minded aesthetically, we'll say. The final question, the bonus question for this tag, was, do you personify your deck? And this was a fun conversation in the original video by 3 Fat Readers, so folks should go check that out. And I'm going to say no. Insofar as I don't name my decks, I don't, think of my decks as having kind of personal identities in that kind of way. I do perhaps occasionally talk about them as though they have a kind of personality, like, oh, this one's really, I don't know, ready to call me on my shit, for example. I would say that more readily about some decks than others, but I think more than anything that's just, I am drawn to perhaps certain decks for certain kinds of questions, or certain decks at certain times, depending on how I'm feeling, depending on what the weather looks like, etc. So I'm going to go on the side of no, that I don't personify my decks. So that's 13 questions. Wow, 29 minutes. That's pretty good. That's like just over 2 minutes a question. These videos always end up longer than I anticipated. So if you stuck with me this long, thanks for watching. Again, I'll link the original HowITarot by 3 Fat Readers down below. And if you're interested in answering the questions, please do. I'm looking forward to seeing other folks' responses. And have a great day. Bye.